Welcome to Jackie's Craft Table. Hi, welcome back for another card tutorial on my YouTube channel and blog. I'm creating two cards today, and I'm going to be using lots of fabulous colored pencils. I found some new colored pencil paper from Strathmore that I'm really enjoying using. It's 100-pound paper. It has more tooth to it than the Neenah Solar White cardstock that I usually use. However, it's not as bright white as the Neenah Solar White. When I'm using colored pencils, I do like my paper to have a bit more tooth to it. It pulls out the pigment more and it's easier to blend the colors. I'm also cutting down a piece of Arches watercolor paper. This is the cold press. I'm going to be using my Prismacolor pencils on the Strathmore colored pencil paper. And on the Arches watercolor paper, I'm going to be using my Inktense watercolor pencils. I'm using another My Favorite Thing stamp set. It's called Which Way is the Candy? It's just a fabulously cute set. I just love it. So I'm going to be going back and forth, stamping on my colored pencil paper and also my Arches watercolor paper. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink on my colored pencil paper. For my Arches watercolor paper, I'm going to be using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it's a waterproof ink. My little cat image is going to be in the foreground. She's going to be in front of everything. So I'm stamping her first. After I stamp her on both of my papers, I'm going to create a mask for her on some sticky note paper. Then I can cut out this little mask, place it on my cat, and it will protect my paper so that I can stamp out some more images. I'm cutting right on the line of this image so that when I go to stamp out my next image, it won't leave a weird halo effect and there won't be any gaps. Now that my cat's protected, I'm going to stamp out this darling little witch image. Next is my little frog image. I'm going to stamp him so that he's sitting on this pumpkin. I'm going to stamp him. But first I'm going to put a mask over the little witch because the pumpkin will be stamped a little bit over her cape. All of the images in this set are so cute. I wanted to stamp all of them on my card. However, I'm sure I'll be making up more cards with this set. I used a piece of Inkadinkado masking paper for my witch because the sticky note paper just wasn't big enough for her. But all of the other images, I'm just using the sticky note paper. Now that all of my images have been stamped out and I have two card panels to work on, I decided to work on my watercolor panel first. It's been a while since I've played with my Inktense watercolor pencils, and I just love them. But I also want to try out these new brushes that I have. They're called Silver Brush, and they came in a 3-pack. And the one I'm using is the round size 4. I also have size 8 and 12. So far, I'm really liking these brushes. While working on this panel, I had to keep reminding myself to loosen up my grip on this brush. I'd find myself holding it in a death grip. I'm really more used to working with colored pencils than with watercolor brushes. It really is a fun process, but you have to just take your time and enjoy moving the paint around. My Inktense pencils come in a set of 36, and I didn't have a lot of skin tones. So I'm just trying to make do with what I have. And then I remembered I wanted to tape down my work so that it doesn't buckle with all of the water that I'm going to be putting down on it. For her skin, I used the tip-to-tip technique, and I just took the pigment straight off of the watercolor pencil with my brush and applied that very lightly. For the rest of it, however, I'm just going to color right onto the paper, and then I will use my watercolor brush to pull out the color. This process reminds me a lot of the old watercolor coloring books that they have for kids. They came with a really cheap watercolor brush, and I remember the paper always tearing because it was really cheap paper, but they sure were a lot of fun. So now I'm going to leave you with the coloring, and I'm going to put on some music, and I'll catch up with you at the end. I allow my watercolor panel to dry completely, and then I gently pull up the tape, and I'm going to cut this down a little bit. I have a book of Halloween pattern paper, and I'm just flipping through here trying to figure out which one I like the best. I absolutely love using pattern paper on my cards. The trouble I have is figuring out which one I want to use because they're all so cute. I decided on going with this cute argyle-like pattern paper, and I'm going to cut that down to 5.5 by 4 1/4. I'm also using a piece of black cardstock to mat the panel. I think it looks just a little more finished with that little bit of black paper showing through behind it. I'm going to heat emboss the sentiment with some white Hero Arts embossing powder. But first I'm going to ink that up with some sticky Versamark ink. I always like to stamp up my sentiment twice just to make sure I've covered everything. Now I can pour on my white embossing powder. And I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. I'm cutting out the sentiment into a thin banner strip. After all of that painting, I don't want to cover up any of it. So I'm just going to glue that down on an angle up at the top. I cut down a piece of 110-pound Neenah Solar White cardstock. I just cut it down the middle at 4 1/4, and then I score it at 5 1/2 to make my card base. I'll adhere my card panel and my sentiment to this card base, and then I'm going to decorate the inside of the card. I'm cutting down the rest of this pattern paper to another thin strip so that I can tape that on the bottom of my card. I'm stamping a sentiment on the inside. It just says boo. I'm going to stamp out the same pumpkins. I'm using some orange ink for that. And that finishes off the inside of my card. I'm going to color in my next card panel now. And this is the Strathmore colored pencil paper. I'm only going to show some of the coloring, otherwise this video would just go on and on forever. I'm using my Faber Castell colored pencils for this. I found that I really enjoyed working on this colored paper. The pencils blended very easily on it. Once my panel is completed and I have it all colored in, I'm using some Gamsol, some odorless mineral spirits, to smoothen out the colored pencils. I don't always use Gamsol to smoothen out the images. I do like the look of the colored pencil, just how it is. But I wanted to see how the Gamsol worked with this paper. And it all blended out very smoothly. It worked really well. When I move from color to color with this blending stump, I make sure to clean off the tip of it by wiping it off on this sandpaper. That way I don't contaminate the different colors on my card panel. I'm going to put a little bit of ground under these images so it doesn't look like they're floating. And then I go over that with some more Gamsol to smoothen it out. Please like, subscribe, and share this video on your favorite social media. I picked out another cute piece of Halloween pattern paper to attach this card panel to, and that completes my cards. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Bye!